if you believe that something is going to go well or you're going to figure it out, you're very likely to figure that thing out. And I'm not like a law of attraction, like manifestation person at all. I'm literally talking about like the science of belief. If I believe I'm capable, my actions will actually follow that to some degree. People can jump to all these crazy assumptions that are completely out of touch with what actually drives a person behind the scenes. So this really cracks the code on showing you this is why this person does what they do. Something as small as that, learning how to your partner what you're doing and why, so that they give you a second to do it instead of misinterpret it, that alone can change a relationship.
All right, perfect. Let's dive in. So this is part 2 of the diagnostic section that we're going to get into.
Of the brain mapping.
Of the brain mapping. So unfortunately, Brian didn't have a brain, so we had to improvise and use, what did we use for Brian?
Diesel,
his dog. Perfect. So canine. Canines are very similar too.
Very smart.
Yeah. All right, so let's dive into yours. Right?
Don't look so excited over there.
Oh, I'm dying to hear what yours turned out to be. Go ahead. Take them.
So I think before we go into the detail, I'll just give a couple of my top level
disclaimers.
No, not even disclaimers. Just like a couple of my top level insights just from looking at both of yours that I thought were interesting, because you both were pretty interesting. Interesting in that there was a lot of seeming juxtaposition and contradiction.
In English, please.
Things that don't seem like they go together altogether. Things that seem like they contradict each other inside of your...
Let's focus on him.
No. I'm gonna explain what just from looking at, because there were similarities in how I looked at both of yours, because you both have similar contradictions in yours, which I thought was really interesting. Because as we were going through the podcast, I was getting a sense of something that then I feel like when you guys started talking, you kind of got me to distracted in a different direction. But then what I saw actually kind of confirmed more what I was originally thinking. So I have a lot of questions, actually.
In my defense, I didn't do that much talking.
You really didn't. I almost thought it was odd how little you talked at all, because I look at all your clips and you're always talking.
I know.
You're so talkative. Why didn't you talk to me?
Because you two were meshing so well. I didn't want to ruin it.
Just wanted to observe. Okay. So seeming contradictions. And if I may, in our group chat, one of the things you said I thought was really interesting. So you were essentially saying something about basically like your questions are broken or something like that, right?
Fucking frustrated the shit out of me. I was staring at it for a minute.
Mm-hmm. Did you do it quickly or did it take you a while?
I did it quickly. Because that was the point of it, I thought.
Yes, except you have a behavior pattern that doesn't make you freeze in the beginning. You're going to like do and then reflect, learn the lesson later, and then kind of like keep turning that engine over. So for you, even if I didn't give you that instruction, you probably still wouldn't have spent that much time on it.
Wait, there was an instruction? I thought just do it at your pace.
Well, when we talked about it on the podcast, I did mention that it shouldn't take you that long when I was explaining how to do the link.
I think it took me 26 minutes.
Okay. That's still not that bad. But typically, there are certain brain pattern types that would do it more toward the 10-minute marker, and I would bet that you were probably more between 10 and 15.
I woke up at 3:30 in the morning, and I took it, and I was like, let's get this out of the way.
Yeah, let's get it done.
Let's get it ready.
So when you had mentioned in the text about the questions, the questions are obviously intentionally backing you against a corner where your brain wants to kind of fight back, because they feel limiting, or your brain wants to push back and say, yeah, but, where it's wanting to push for things that are somewhat in the middle or look for exceptions rather than to kind of like back yourself against a wall and say, this is a rule. Other people that have a brain pattern type that's typically on the left-hand side don't do that. They're just kind of like, whatever, like it doesn't, I'll just answer these questions and we'll figure it all out later. So what I think is important for everybody to know before we kind of dive into the detail is that the questions that you're referring to don't factor into the prediction at all. So what ends up happening is that the 200 historical data points, those are what create the model prediction. Then what we do is we watch you potentially contradict yourself as a way to check and balance what the model prediction was. So we kind of, at that point, we would already know before even selecting those. So we have an understanding of, hypothetically, if your prediction was correct, which ones should be checked off. But we can also see where you're kind of at war with yourself, where you'll say, like, I'm this, but I'm also that, but I'm also this. So in going through those, they are intentionally worded to kind of piss certain people off. And additionally, you had like kind of low scores and everything. So that can happen for a few different reasons. So sometimes low scores in that timeline section where you're kind of like self-rating rather than the historical data. Sometimes people will have low scores because they don't want to be backed into a corner. And unless it's 100% true, they won't check it.
Okay.
So I'm curious, as you were going through yours, was that part of your thought process? If this wasn't 100% true, then I'm just not checking it.
No.
So essentially,
it was the highest probability or the closest to, kind of like.
So some people have low scores because they're trying to control it. Others have low scores because they're so flexible and adaptable that they're like, like everything's pretty malleable, which was my sense of your pattern because of what your prediction was. So, and you can see, I'll just kind of like flip this around. So when we look at the diagnostic, there's a section over here where you can kind of write feedback. So a lot of my feedback.
Bizzie, I can't even see it 18 inches away from you.
Well, I was looking at your podcast director.
Okay.
I'm going to level with you. I can barely see this without my glasses.
So what does that mean, low score?
So low score for all of the behaviors and how the behaviors cascade, either overactive, underactive, or something can go from over to under or from under to over. So if you think about it, like, I know that you guys are car guys, like shifting gears, some people will just like immediately go full throttle. Like think of pushing your foot down on the gas pedal, or not the gas pedal of a Tesla.
The electric pedal.
The electric pedal. Right. You're not slowly feeling it gear up. You're just literally like hitting the back of your seat. If somebody was more impulsive, you would get that sense in how they're answering questions that the velocity is there and they're not slowly, methodically leveling up. You're not feeling the gears shift. They're going to do something that's going to potentially feel really jerky, like hitting that pedal on a Tesla where you kind of get slammed back. As you can imagine, if somebody does that, there's going to be fallout in their external world. You can't just like immediately go 100 miles per hour and other people have a hard time kind of like leveling up with you because you didn't pace them there. So imagine for a moment that someone's first behavior is overactive communication, which can happen very frequently. I'm sure you can think of some people that very quickly have no filter and over communicate. It causes a lot of conflict. And they probably say many things while they're processing before they've really thought about it that will come back and bite them in the ass later. So that's just an example of somebody who could have overactive communication very early in the cycle where we would potentially see them not able to bring people into the context or what they're thinking about. So other people are going to feel possibly like attacked or like the person is maybe mentally unstable. If you think about, like, each of you think of a moment in your last 2 weeks, or maybe you got a little scared, like something seemed like it was going wrong. Can you come up with something in your head?
Scared?
Yeah, just like a little fearful, like kind of more that anticipation, vigilance, like, something feels a little bit off. Can you think of a time?
Not in the last 2 weeks, no.
Okay, so go back further than that.
Scared. I mean, there's like, what's considered scared?
The definition I typically give when I'm working with clients when we're trying to understand the fear state is we're not talking someone's chasing after you with a knife.
Okay.
We're talking maybe a partner walks in the room and you realize like, oh shit, I forgot to get the milk when I told her I was going to get the milk, and she might be really upset with that. Where it's like something subtle, but it's a sudden awareness that you made a mistake or somebody else made a mistake, or maybe a bill wasn't paid, or you asked somebody in your business to do something, they didn't do it quite right. It's that moment that you go from not knowing to either knowing or assuming. That would be that fear state that I'm talking about, where it's the general unease that something's wrong.
I don't come across that too often.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect that with the 1- score that you have.
Okay.
But what about you?
Court the other week.
Okay, yeah, that should possibly do it.
Just a little bit.
Okay, so For some people, and the three of us are not necessarily going to be the best examples because all three of us are pretty 1- leaning, which means that we're all actually pretty adaptable, though you are actually, ironically, the least adaptable out of the three of us. You've got, I know that you didn't like my juxtaposition word, but you've got, I wish, sometimes I wish I came with a dictionary. I could just be like, pause. So you have both sides. And one of my questions for you, which I'll get to, is I have some ideas on when that might have happened and why that might have happened, but we'll get there. So all of us are actually pretty flexible, which means that our fear state, we're not necessarily concocting this like wild what if scenario. We're kind of just, we're going to go in and let it unfold and kind of function on the fly. But if you think of maybe somebody else in this room, and I'll give an example of a client, some people when they're in fear, they immediately go into future worst case scenario. They assume who's responsible for what, and they're already acting as if those things are pretty much real. If that person, all those thoughts were to be verbalized, do you think that that would probably do damage in their life if they couldn't keep that in?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, right? Tons of damage. And this happens all the time, especially in intimate relationships, because if you're around people all the time and you don't have this communication filter, you're going to say a bunch of stuff that's either not true, you haven't really processed through it, and then you've maybe like planted a bunch of seeds of doubt in your partner, right? So an example of this could be, let's say someone's in like early stages of a relationship and they don't have this communication filter. You might start saying things as you're processing out loud that like make the person believe that maybe you're not that into them, or maybe you're even seeing other people when you're like, no, I don't really mean that. I don't really mean that. As soon as you start to get the sense that they're now going to turn on you in response. That's what we're talking about with this kind of like early stage lack of a communication filter. So we're looking at these numbers, whether they have high scores. So every single one of these overactive combos is out of a score of 5. Most of you guys were on average at like 2 out of 5 on certain ones, which is less common. Usually you have people where it's like 0s or 1s, and then there's select areas where they'll have a 4 or 5. So they're really clear that it's this versus that. You guys had more spread out low scores, which again, because most of us are 1- leaning, which is that start position, which is like being adaptable, being flexible, it makes sense that from that starting place, our scores are relatively lower because we are so adaptable. That's going to continue to snowball as we move through the behavior cycle. So I wouldn't expect either of you, based on that start position, to have too much overactivity. So on all of these markers, so we're looking at numbers 1 through 6. There's going to be different categories of behavior for each. 1 is going to be predominantly, of course, how we respond to fear, which we kind of talked about briefly. Also, this is going to be how we embody like finances, anything surrounding security. Like, do we meal plan? Are we organized in our home, or are we chaotic in our home? So anything has to do with like home life, security, anything tied to fear. Then you kind of move on from there into like sexuality and intimacy, all the way up through whether or not somebody seeks validation through performance, whether they're looking for measurement, which actually, I mean, we all actually have some similarities there, which actually none of us are extremely oriented toward validation for the sake of validation. What I would expect from looking at both of yours is that there's a little bit more like you have to see value in what you're pouring yourself into. It's not like just to check a box or like just to get a grade or a marker, which if you think culturally for a moment, I have a lot of Indian people on my team. Indian people, Chinese people, as a general rule, culturally, if you tell them like you have to do this to get this carrot, even if they don't like it or they don't see inherent value in it, they're just going to like keep getting the carrot over and over again. Neither one of you had that. So for each of you, you had a slightly higher score than you did, but for each of you, your commitment has to come first, which is not necessarily true for those cultures that I described before, where they don't necessarily have to see value in it personally and be committed to it to do it. They'll just do it. Both of you, there needs to be more on the line. There needs to be a little bit more purpose or commitment in it to want to jump and dangle or jump to get the carrot. Does that feel accurate for you, that you have to see value in something to want to do it? Otherwise, you'll be a little bit more like, if I don't care, then I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So little scores like that where it's a subtle nuance shift, but if I can see your scores for like commitment and loyalty are significantly higher than your scores for validation and performance, but ultimately you have scores in both.
Wait, whose?
It was the same for both of you. You guys are off by like a point each, but ultimately you both actually have a lot of similarities. There's a lot of differences, I think, in like fundamentally how you will perceive reality in a situation, but there are actually some similarities in how, number one, this was an interesting one. So the way you wrote about your childhood, you would think like if I just took what you wrote at face value, your brain pattern type should be something else entirely. But because we track the historical data the way we do, the historical data tells a different picture of what you told on your 3-box. And actually the same is true for you, but in the reverse. So like hypothetically, your childhood should have spit out his pattern and your childhood should have spit out your pattern, which I found to be a really unique sort of contradiction. Okay. So that's why when I was texting you guys, I'm like, this is pretty wild because really how you're each labeling something, you guys should each of you should have the opposite one, but like literally not just like vaguely, but exactly the opposite one. So sometimes you see this in intimate partnerships and friendships where
I got to correct you here. There's nothing intimate in our business partnership.
Just so I'm sure there's nothing intimate. I would never have thought that at all. Right.
He's just making it clear.
Just making it clear.
Yes.
I have a wife. He has a wife. Had a wife. Two kids.
I'm like, I have a wife? What?
I know, even I was like, he does? I thought, no.
But she's still around.
She's alive.
And kicking.
And taking care of the kids.
Good. Yes. Good. So that was an interesting phenomenon. So when we go through each of yours, I'll kind of explain what led the prediction to be what it is, and then how we kind of piece all the different parts of the diagnostic together. You probably got a sense as you were going through it, like you can tell when you're transitioning from historical data to then kind of more like my self-analysis portions of it. So the historical data will give us the model prediction, and then we get your sense of kind of how you would rate your own behaviors, which then again, just like we have that as a match to see like how compared to what the model said should be happening, how close is this matrix? Then you go through the process of ordering those numbers. The model would have already ordered your numbers for you. So this can do two things. We either see that there's some nuance that you're picking up on that the model's not picking up on, and we can make adjustments based on what you're saying. But more often than not, what we actually see is how we talked about self-deception on the last podcast, how self-deception can actually deceive you into thinking that it's this way when it actually is really the way the model predicted it. One thing that I noticed that I thought was pretty interesting, now that I've been on a lot of podcasts, everyone's podcast has a very specific type of audience, right? So like kind of what draws them to you, they typically have some sort of common thread. I was just on Dave Asprey's podcast and we had like hundreds and hundreds of people come through BPM from there. And one of the things that I noticed is obviously they had a lot of them kind of clustered around a similar brain pattern type, but because they've all done so much self-awareness work, their ability to land the plane every time on the timeline order was, I've like never seen it before with any other group. So bravo to that group. Their ability to understand out in what order they do things was highly accurate. And actually both of you were completely in line with the prediction. So again, that just shows like a certain level of self-awareness where you're not convincing yourself you're doing something that you're not really doing. There's an awareness of what I'm doing as I'm like moving through time space. So that's generally speaking how we go through the process is we're scanning the historical data. It's making the model prediction. I don't like to look at the model prediction first because I don't want to be primed with it, but somebody on our team would like use that as the starting place. So I don't look at it. I pour through it. I make my own model prediction. Then I go through the timeline ordering, and then I go through kind of the other pieces and pull it all together to see if I put all these things over each other, what sort of image comes into view. Then I look at the model prediction. One of the things about the model prediction that I think is pretty unique is it'll show you down at the bottom what data points it used to make these determinations, and it'll give a confidence score. So let's say it's like this cluster is why I made this decision, this cluster is why I made this decision. And sometimes what you'll see is because I'm not looking at the model prediction, I know at what points I'm like, oh, this. So like I'm kind of going a little bit here, going a little bit there. And you can actually see in the computer modeling that it's kind of making the same sort of slight deviations before it comes to a final conclusion. So as you're looking at the actual map itself, you can see how it's piecing the whole thing together so that you can also say from a human being's perspective, do I fundamentally agree with the computer's logic or do I disagree with it? So
we're going to do a deep dive on the individual results.
Yep. We're going to go to Brian right now.
Let's do it.
Okay. So when it comes to your fear state, you actually had almost even scores across all three, which is pretty interesting because typically, if you would think about it, somebody that's go with the flow and spontaneous is typically not going to be highly controlled and organized. The two don't typically go together. So one of the things that I had here that I wanted to talk through with your pattern, because so technically your pattern placed you on the very far right side. And I'll give a visual so that people can actually map this and look at it. So I think you might recall that we talked about how on that far right side circle was that chaos-oriented pattern.
Mm-hmm. The Joker.
Yes, the Joker. Mm-hmm. So in that chaos pattern, we would expect that the childhood inputs would have been extremely volatile, severe neglect. The child basically had to fend for themselves in such a way that they had to basically dissociate and stop caring, like not even try to save themselves, but kind of just be like, whatever, this is a wash. You're not there, but you're slightly to the left of it into a different pattern called rejection control to receive love. But in this cluster where you are, there tends to be, which this is why, as we were going through this yesterday, I work with so many clients that are kind of more extreme athletes and tend to be a little bit more like riding the edge of recklessness is maybe the nice way to say it. Yeah. So technically that pattern right there, somewhere underneath, like maybe you're aware of this, maybe you're not, but somewhere underneath, there was a point in time where you did care about what other people thought about you. And I don't have a way of deciding whether that had like came from like the influence of grandparents or like some sort of outside force, because technically what you wrote about your parents would have been volatile enough to not necessarily spit out the pattern that the model prediction says that you have. You would expect more of an abandon-oriented pattern. Anytime there's like substance abuse or any sort of like inconsistency in the home environment, which interestingly, there's a part of you that does seem like it goes all the way left. So like, I think, did I talk about the mirroring effect last time we talked? Okay.
I don't think so.
So we know that the brain pattern spectrum splits in two halves. They're equal halves, right? So sometimes exactly the position on the right, if you fold them on top of each other, it'll have similar behavior presentations to the exact same position on the symmetrical left side. So what's interesting is when going through this, what the model kept doing is it was like, he's either right here, right here, right here, right here. So, and I was kind of going through the same thing too, because the prediction that should have been matched to the way you described your childhood would have been that far left, which is an abandon control overt pattern. But that pattern is very oriented around safety and things being very black and white and being extremely rigid, which obviously you do not have. So my question to you, because you're definitely the way that I ended up making sense of this was that you are that kind of like equal opposite on the right-hand side. My question to you was, there's a chance that the reason it was kind of doing this, where it was like, it could have gone 50-50, all the way left, all the way right. Sometimes when kids are raised in the environment that you had, there comes a point where your brain decides, I want to control, I want safety so much, but it is not possible in this environment. So it's almost like you willingly become reckless because it's like the only cure to desire and control is to intentionally do the opposite. So I have this written in your notes and I'll share it with you, but two things, it's going to come from one or two things. Option one, your brain realized I have to pendulum swing myself to survive because this is like, I can't do this. It's futile, which ultimately that perception of futility is what catapulted you over toward these kind of more chaos oriented people who technically would have had an even worse life than you did. But you chose futility as a pendulum swing from control, which to me, I would probably lean in that direction because you have those even scores with control. You've got, so 1+ is typically what we'd expect to see somebody who's like extremely controlling. You've got a 3 out of 5. 1+ chaos, you've got a 2 out of 5, which is kind of that like in between, which is like, I'm a little of this, little of that. And then you have a 2 and 1-, which is more the like go with the flow, flexible, whatever. If you're all the way on the right, this is where the reason as you move toward that far right side, it's more of a chaotic pattern because you can kind of be a little bit of everything. You're not necessarily one way. So my sense of it as I was going through this is that most likely, and I'm not in your head and I can't tell you at what age or how this would have happened, but my sense is probably early on you were positioned to be abandon control overt. And at some moment, either your subconscious put you there or you made some sort of conscious choice like, I can't do this. So you kind of let go and became more reckless intentionally.
Probably middle school.
Middle school? Okay. And what age do you think that was? Because typically, right, a brain pattern, so this is what's cool. So an origin position in the brain pattern is going to be roughly between 2 and 5. People have trouble believing the 0 part, but 2 and 5. And then how we're looking at the adaptive is basically like 5 to 12. So typically that's what's going to pendulum swing you like you did. So middle school is where somebody can be like, whatever, this isn't working. Like I can't do it anymore. It's too much. And then you can make an active choice essentially into rebellion. So that was, from looking at it, that was what I feel like is the most likely for you, is that the reason it was literally going, it's this or this or this, it could not make a decision, is because I think there was a point where you chose to go the other way, even though your childhood environment didn't necessarily cause it per se.
I'd say it was like 12, 13.
12, 13. And was it one specific event or a series of events?
Series.
So, and before that, were you slightly more anxious or wanting to control things or know what came next?
I was super messy, and then just one day I woke up and just started fucking organizing everything.
Okay.
Looked like a fucking bomb went off every day.
Okay. So essentially what we're looking at here is that, and I'll give you your whole pattern, but essentially what we're looking at is that you're going to go, your communication was interesting too. I think ultimately you are what I would describe as 5- plus. So you're going to kind of watch and observe first, but if something pushes you off the edge, it's not like a slow trickle. You're either quiet or loud. And like,
he's seen it.
Yeah. So for somebody that, let's say like in early stages of getting to know you, you might be more likely to observe for a while and like kind of pull it back a little bit. So the first time you do go more over, it might actually really scare the shit out of somebody. Yeah. Right. Because in their mind, they've like pegged you one way and then it feels like a sneak attack. And they're like, oh shit, I wasn't ready for that. And you have that as like your first step out of fear. So either your fear state's going to be like observing and kind of pulled back, or if somebody pushes you, I mean, I would expect that you might be able to
game on,
snap pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's the Indian side.
Probably.
Indians
I don't know.
tempers.
My dad's Jewish, and my dad is like the angriest, loudest man ever. So I've only known Jews to be loud and angry.
My dad wasn't really
Indians have pretty crazy tempers.
Okay.
Crazy tempers. Yeah.
Okay. So
the minute they hear an insult,
game on.
Boom. It's over.
So for what it's worth, this is kind of where I was going with it, because I know that yesterday you were kind of mentioning that there wasn't necessarily like a strong cultural part of the upbringing or even strong religion or anything like that. Typically, when we see people end up on the right side of the spectrum, more where you are, there's usually an influence like culture, religion, or families tend to be almost more like stifling with staying married and like overdoing it, which pushes the kid to be like reckless because they just want to get out of the control structure. So obviously those things didn't match with your childhood, which is why I think it was kind of doing this thing, because ultimately so in the questionnaire, you might have recalled that there are questions about inputs and then there are questions about output, like how you would describe yourself as a student, for example. So essentially what happens is that there are these outputs that we know all go together that map to one pattern. So basically you had outputs that map to one pattern and then you had inputs that map to a different pattern, which is why I was kind of like doing this the whole time.
I think he was trying to shift himself to the left.
So ultimately,
and he's like, how can I answer this
is that
to be
even
more
possible?
left?
To skew the test?
I don't think it's possible to skew the test only because of the way that we map those timeline things. So that's kind of what I was telling you when you were like, the questions are broken. I'm like, no, they worked exactly as they were supposed to. So I think big picture, let's say if somebody was, I'll give like an arbitrary number right now. Let's say that there's 5 more steps to go out to the farthest right side of the spectrum and you're like right there. If I were to walk in like 3 or 4 more steps, that person would likely have more like order or culture, or religion, or like something that was kind of more of a consistent structure. And there would be typically more of a desire to seek either validation or feedback, or at least kind of care about what people think about them. Once you kind of tip off the edge of where you are, it's almost like an intentional, like, I don't care what you think. But sometimes that sense of like, I don't care what you think is itself an adaptation, which personally, from looking at yours, I think it's an adaptation.
For sure.
I think you definitely gave a shit.
I gave a shit up to a certain point.
And then you decided like, it's better for me to not care.
Mm-hmm.
But your brain pattern shows me that you actually did at one point really care, but you chose at some point. It doesn't tell me where you chose, but it shows me that it's not your natural position. So your natural position is actually to care what people think about you. So this kind of goes back to this hypothesis of it's showing me that you actually, there were some elements of like being more structured and rigid and all those things. And then at a certain point, you kind of actively chose to oppose your patterns because it's part of that's natural. Like a lot of times the reason people that are people pleasers eventually snap is because that energy's been like bottled up and it needs to go somewhere. So it's part of, I think, our DNA and our internal knowing that we know there needs to be some sort of opposite force to heal. But I think part of the core of my work is that if we wait for the brain and body to do it on its own, it's usually really messy. Like we don't just want to be like, enough of this, I'm going to do this instead. There's like this Goldilocks and the 3 bears, like ideal scenario of how to walk ourselves methodically or strategically to the center that doesn't make us have to do this all day long. Because most people, if you look at, like I'm 40, if you look at like your 20s as a group, your 30s as a group, there's usually these pretty wild pendulum swings that can do damage. And maybe that's in the form of like relationships or like having kids with somebody that you're not with anymore, which has happened in my life. So I think big picture, when I look at yours, I can see that there must have been moments that your brain told you, I can't do it this way. Like the way that you were actually patterned made you like kind of resist and intentionally pendulum swing the other way. And I can see that here. So you go from 1+ chaos, which is neither extremely controlling nor is it messy and spontaneous. It kind of shows me that you're like personally pulled in 2 different directions. Like there's 2 different sides of you. So I would think what would make the deciding factor is how familiar you feel with something. So let's say a scenario is something you feel really familiar with, or it's something that you feel like you have a personal skill in. I think you'd be much more spontaneous. If something's potentially unknown or you don't personally feel confident in that arena, you'd be much more likely to be controlled and orderly because your brain believes like that's the way to make sure I can figure out how to do this. Wait. So like, right, if it's something which, I think some people might hear that and be like, yeah, duh. But honestly, from looking at literally tens of thousands of brain pattern types, that's not true. Honestly, some people are their worst with the familiar. Really? Like the more I'm familiar with this or the closer I am to somebody, they get my absolute worst qualities because it's safe for me to unleash on you. So this is actually very important because for you, it shows that at some level you once cared what people thought about you, which is why I think if you feel confident in something, you can be more flexible. But if you're not necessarily confident, you can become a little bit more rigid or methodical. That just shows that at some core level, there was a part of you that gave a shit. And I can't tell you exactly why or where. But example for me, I'm like a true 1- and I'm on the left side and I just really don't give a shit and never did and never would and nothing would ever change that. Obviously that comes with its own, everyone's got their own set of problems. So you're going to go from that 1+ chaos, which is what I described, which is the more familiar, the more kind of chill and relaxed I can be. And then if I feel like I might need to grow or this is not my comfort zone, you could be more controlling. Ultimately, that push-pull relationship, I would expect that an intimate relationship could be a challenge because the other person might not know in your mind what you feel confident or not confident about. So they might think that you're going to do one thing and then you're doing the other. So that can feel really challenging to like be in a relationship with somebody like that. So that's one area because that'll be your fear. And let's say that you're with somebody who is reactive in fear, that could obviously escalate like pretty bad. Did that happen to you a little bit?
I wouldn't comment on that as your attorney.
Okay. Yes. Okay. we will keep that out of this conversation. So you're going from that kind of like internal tug of war that ultimately is going to be somewhat tied to confidence, whereas potentially you wouldn't care. Like based on at least what your brain pattern is, you don't necessarily the experience of confidence for you is not going to be connected to how somebody else would perceive you in that moment. That what your brain wouldn't even factor that in. But there's a part of you that even though you've kind of pushed it aside, that's still firing. So then you're going to do kind of the either observant, quiet, or like
pop off.
We've popped off, okay? But one thing I want you to know is that observant quiet is still technically tied to anger. So your quiet observation is going to be like that transition point between fear to anger that's like a little bit more covert, but you're like already getting ready, like just in case. So it'll be potentially a little bit more, maybe like on the front face, it would look like observing and kind of like you're just being quiet, but your brain's already like preparing you just in case. So that by the time something does pop off, it's like it wasn't, other people didn't know it, but it was slow brewing for a while. Then you're going to go to 4-, which can show up like rebellion. It can show up like kind of pulling back or like a brake check where your brain is not necessarily going to go immediately like dive right into something. So what's interesting is you have a 4- plus. So typically with 4- plus, it's like my brain is going to try to talk me out of diving all the way in or out of commitment. But then like once you cross that threshold, then you're like super committed. And then you're kind of like, once you cross that line, if somebody didn't know your internal thought process, it might seem like you're impulsive. But I think what I'm trying to tell you is that it could read as impulsivity, but I can see it's not actually impulsivity because you're more likely to like probably try to talk yourself out of it or like kind of pro and con yourself where you're actually, I know that you would be slower to commit, but people are going to really pick up on once you've crossed the threshold that it'll look like you're like super in and committed. But I can see that you're not that way.
Yeah, I did that yesterday.
Okay. So that would be when you're kind of shifting gears out of anger into more anxiety. And this is where you're going to start to trend to reflection. So how people are processing information and where that's placed is going to really determine a lot about their personality. I have it at the end, you have it at the end, and I'm pretty sure you had it at the end. So none of us are necessarily going to like get stuck in a freeze response or we're going to like overthink it. Every single one of us is more likely to reflect at the end. So it's almost like more, for some people, it'll be more like heavy replaying where they're kind of like beating themselves up, trying to figure out like, what did I do wrong? How could I fix that? Your score is extremely low. So you had a 1 out of 5. I have a 1 out of 5. I think you had a 2 out of 5. So like those are all really low scores. Most people, because there's 2 different groupings of it, most people have like 5 out of 5, 5 out of 5. So
are
like,
low scores or high scores desired?
I think in general, low scores are going to equate with a better perceived quality of life because it means that we're less charged. Like when you have high scores and everything, things are going to feel really intense. Like I'm intensely this way, I'm intensely that way. When you have low scores throughout things, which you don't have low scores throughout everything, you've got low scores in some areas, but in this kind of like analysis, information processing, all 3 of us have pretty damn low scores, which like for me, it'll make me move on really quickly where I'm just kind of like on to the next, like whatever, like shit, that didn't work out. Let's just reset. Better luck next time. But somebody else might be watching me like, why isn't she spending more time reviewing this? Like, doesn't she want to? But that's my brain's protective mechanism where I'm just like always ready for the next, like just reset. But it can also make me miss red flags, maybe forgive people that I probably shouldn't have forgiven or let people have proximity to me that everyone else would be like, yo, are you sure you want to let them back in that quick? So that's kind of a negative where it's like when you have a low score there at the end, you're not going to get stuck there for very long. Like sometimes people that have high scores there, they go into like suicidal ideation or apathy or whatever. Like I could see you having like a slightly reckless apathy, but you're going to take it out, I would think, in a more action-oriented way. You're not going to like laze in your bed and do nothing necessarily, right? Like every single one of us here is like more action-oriented. But some people, let's say, that have a really high score at the end, they'll descend into chaos and struggle with depression, and they'll go into a full-blown apathy state, and they're like replaying everything and skewing things to a very negative perspective.
Do you feel business owners are more that score, since the three of us are business
entrepreneurs? Yeah. Hell yeah. And if you think about it this way, if somebody has a high score like that early, they're going to burn out. They'll burn bridges. They won't take risks. Like I can say for sure, there was 2 years of my life where I lost so much money in bad deals. And instead of being like, I'm a failure, I shouldn't be doing this, I was like, if I lost $1 million, I better make $10 million this year so I can pay everybody back and like learn from my lesson and keep going. But somebody that has that early over processing, they wouldn't do that. They'd be like, I'm a failure. What am I doing? Or they'd be too slow to take action, right? Because that it gives you, if we were observing them, it would look like a freeze response. None of us have a freeze response. We're just kind of like maybe going too hard, right? We're like, we could all probably benefit from maybe finding opportunities to slow down and be like, do I need to learn any lessons at this moment before I like hit the gas pedal again? But that's what happens when you have that processing at the end. So everything's going to have positives and negatives. For us, all three of us, because that's where we all have in common, the positive is that we're not going to get stuck in our heads for very long. It's probably going to be hard for somebody to like, this has happened in multiple relationships. If I have a fight with a partner, when it's over, I'm like, cool. And then I go to bed, right? And I've been woken up by a partner like, how could you go to bed right now? And I'm like, we're done, right? We finished. But because they can't let go of it. They're still thinking about it. And I'm like, it's done. So now I'm
going to sleep.
I'm going to sleep. But that's because of these scores.
Gotcha.
Because I'm not going to, my brain won't prioritize. I have to keep pouring through this and figure out what's wrong or what they think about me. So interestingly enough, that is, I think, what's also doing this thing where the model's like, here. Because technically somebody where you are wouldn't necessarily have a low 6 at the end. So that's giving you this sensation that like, I don't really care what people think, but it's almost because your brain's skipping over thinking about it is what I see. So it's like somebody else might think about it more and your brain is just like, it's easier for me to just like reset.
Keep moving.
Do it again. Keep it moving. Which the reason I said this is so interesting is that people, technically somebody like you shouldn't do that unless somebody has kind of adapted that way with some intentional choice at some point. So an example to kind of contrast this is I have seen people that are all the way to that right side in the chaos pattern eventually find something like AA or NA and they actually become the opposite, because that's like their way to hold it together, is that they like, instead of being like walking chaos, drug addict, counterculture, they become like a born again Christian that keeps everything on the straight and narrow, and there's no in between. They can't find moderation, and that's their only way to kind of pretend to be in the middle. So that's kind of, obviously I could literally go through this with you for an hour, but basically that is how your brain will keep like observing a situation, responding, solving the problem, moving on and resetting. Like I can see that you're not going to spend a long time dwelling on something. You're just going to keep resetting. And, you know, one of the things that I love about this is, let's say I have couples. If I can look at how you move through things with your timeline map and then I put it next to your partner's, without knowing anything about you, I can tell you exactly what you fight about, who's going to do what, and why the other person's triggered. And if you can show your partner, like, hey, I know that you're reading this reaction this way. Let me show you what's actually happening behind the scenes. All of a sudden, people are like, oh my God, it has nothing to do with me. This isn't personal. I thought that he was pulling away and rejecting me, when you might actually be pulling back and observing because you don't want to make a mistake. So it's like, in you not making a mistake, they feel like you're pulling away. So it's, people can jump to all these crazy assumptions that are completely out of touch with what actually drives a person behind the scenes. So this really cracks the code on showing you this is why this person does what they do. So with all of your patterns, I'll give you a printout of basically exactly what patterns of self-deception I'd expect you to have, how you justify things, how you rationalize them, and what things you can kind of shift in yourself to come back a little bit more to center, because this serves you, I'm sure, in business as mine does me. But if I don't do my work, it really doesn't serve me in my intimate relationships. And if I'm not careful, it can also do other small harms in parenting. And we're all well served to learn when something is a benefit and when something's a risk, to learn how to just like with little things strategically oppose it, so that we're helping collaboration, or when it comes to kids, helping them not have to deal with the issues that we're dealing with. So
I appreciate it.
That's you in a nutshell. And part of the reason that I was laughing about the questions thing is because only rejections on the right side will do that, which I already thought you were. But again, kind of going back to this, like it going left, right. Hypothetically, you should have been a left, but somehow you went right
for whatever that reason is.
Yeah. But the cool thing is that the model can see it anyways. So even though I can't tell you exactly why or when, I know that you did it.
Yeah,
without having
it saw the flip
you.
somewhere.
Yes.
And that's not politically speaking. That's just,
no, that's not political.
Well, no, the part I just find interesting about a lot of this is anytime a problem happens or an argument happens, I take 3 steps back.
I know, I can see
because I don't want to say anything stupid at the moment.
I see it. And if you were to imagine, and I'm sure maybe you do this, and I don't mean this as like a, like demeaning or belittling your intelligence, because I'm sure you're a really smart guy. You seem like it. Something as small as that, learning how to communicate to your partner what you're doing and why, so that they give you a second to do it instead of misinterpret it, that alone can change a relationship. And a lot of people, that doesn't occur to them. Especially if before that they were in a 5-, their brain's not going to be like, you should fill in the gaps for this person, because you're already kind of like pulled back and discerning. So
appreciate it.
Any other questions for me before I shift gears? Okay.
I can see the look of excitement on his face.
Hello,
There's no
friend.
excitement. Nothing I don't already know.
Oh yeah? Let's see if she pops that bubble.
There's no bubble to be popped.
So obviously I mentioned this already, but what's interesting about you is if you accurately detailed some of your childhood to me, you should have been a rejection, but you're an abandonment. So you are an abandon, hold it all together, which is my pattern too.
What does that mean?
Short strokes, it means that you are situationally aware and relationally aware. So remember how we were explaining on the spectrum, it's like the further you go left, you become increasingly more situationally aware. You and I we're not in that center circle of complacency, but we're both like just slightly to the left, which means that we're a little bit more balanced than the average person. And like, I'm aware of, I can like see what people are thinking and feeling, and I give a shit. I'm not just like so blind to what I'm doing that I'm not reading the room. So somebody like you would potentially, you could have tact, or you could choose not to have tact. But I think the key is you know how to have tact, but you probably have moments where like, whether it's sarcasm or sense of humor, you choose not to. But ultimately, some people don't know what tact is. So when you go like too far out, not you, because I already explained you, but not you. But there are some rejection patterns that they don't know how to have tact. Same with on that far left side. Everything feels very black and white, and like it either is, I either feel this way or I don't, and if I feel it, then it's real, and then of course you're going to be lacking tact. You don't have that. You're going to be able to read the room, you're going to have tact, you're going to know how to anticipate what other people need. So your pattern type is going to be much more oriented toward self-sacrifice and service. So like doing those things is not hard for you. What's harder is not doing those things, whereas other pattern types are much more self-centered. So where somebody else might be self-centered and miss that somebody in their family unit needs something, you're going to anticipate it, pick up on it, and you'll be able to actively engage and be like, do you need me to do this? Or you're just going to do it. Other patterns, like literally 99% of the rest of the spectrum, wouldn't do that. They'd be more thinking about, like, how would it be interpreted if I did this? You're just going to step in and start doing. And it's the only pattern type that does that, just kind of like the step in and just start helping. So again, you could overdo it where you overload your plate and you're overly available, but it does sound just from talking to you yesterday that, as I would expect with this pattern, you also have a high level of self-awareness. So you're probably aware of when it's too much, so you know how to manage your energy and pull back. But is that something that you always knew how to do?
Probably no, you grow into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to learn.
You got to learn. But you learn typically with our pattern type from burnt out, being burned out, or from enabling other people where you're like, this is like, what am I doing? This is stupid. So our pattern type also is the most likely, and I'm not saying that your relationship is toxic, but of all the patterns, ours is the most likely to stay in something way after it's expired, because our brain is always like, they're going to turn it around. We can figure it out.
About 20 years ago, that was the case, but yeah.
Right. So you've obviously, you're emotionally mature, you're self-aware. So I would expect pattern types that are more toward the center, there's naturally going to be more of like I can make these subtle shifts to recalibrate. So I would expect that with you at your age, but maybe like 20s, early 30s, less likely. So typically, let's say somebody's not as self-aware as you or I. These are the people that could end up in an abusive relationship for like 25 years because they're like, I try to see the best in people. So our pattern type is more overly optimistic to a point where other people might be like, you sure, dude? Like, why don't you consider this and this and this? But the cool thing, and I don't know if we talked about positive or negative self-deception on the last show, but if you believe that something is going to go well or you're going to figure it out, you're very likely to figure that thing out. And I'm not like a law of attraction, manifestation person at all. I'm literally talking about like the science of belief. If I believe I'm capable, my actions will actually follow that to some degree. But one of the self-deceptions for your pattern type is that you believe you can figure it out, and you usually do. But sometimes we're figuring out things that maybe are other people's jobs to figure out. One of the things that your pattern type can struggle with, and again, go back to maybe like more unhealed version of you before you started to do a lot of the work. It can be a struggle to delegate for this pattern, because as you're trying to tell them what to do, your brain's like, fuck it, I'll just do it myself. Like, this is too much. This is where it's like the detail work of like administrative stuff makes you just want to like.
I think the way you overcome that, or the way I found to overcome that, is if you're going to do 100%, you got to be okay with someone else doing 80% as good as you. And if you're okay with 80%, it's good enough, and just let them do it. Yes. So I think that personality type, the way you can convince yourself to delegate is by understanding that they're not going to be as good as you. You just got to accept that 70% or 80% of you is better than. Yeah.
Yes. And I'm curious, so when it comes to the process of actually nurturing an employee, for example, do you put yourself in the role of helping nurture that employee, or do you try to put in a middleman so that you don't have to do that?
I guess the way I do business now is I try to find a good operating partner and let them do what they do best. Mm-hmm. And if I need to come in and just do a little bit of guidance here and there, I'll do that. But I prefer to just be left out of things, of the day-to-days, but only come in with that razor focused, or like a surgeon, just come in and just do what needs to be done and just get out.
Perfect. So same. And we talked about this a little bit, but Axe from Billions is the same pattern type that you have. Also, you don't have like the highest 1- score, which is that like spontaneous flexibility, but you definitely have it. And I don't know if you remember this scene in Billions, but it's like, it's right in the very beginning, and whoever, I think it's like Spiros or whatever, is like talking about like how he just has this orbit and people like follow him, and like nobody knows what's going to happen, and like everything's on the fly, and like people just start to like follow him around because he's got his own orbit and he just kind of like makes everything on the fly. You're going to have that up until a point, but your brain also sees value in structure and order. But I would expect that for you to be a little bit more balanced than you. Yours is going to be like, I would expect you to be like this or that. You're like a this and that, pretty methodically.
I had that orbit growing up also. I used to have a lot of people just kind of gravitate towards me and just kind of go with the flow.
And with your pattern, you're also the most likely to have everybody like come and confide in you. So this pattern type, we hold a lot of other people's secrets, and we're actually one of the best secret keepers out of everyone in the group, because people like loyalty is usually like one of the highest things for our pattern type. And that loyalty, all these things can come at an expense, right? You can be like too available. You can say yes too much. You can be too self-sacrificing to a point where you like might let your own health kind of go out the window. Like, I know this has been something that I've struggled with.
My health is like priority number one. I do have a selfish tendency where I do come first. So there is a fine line that I always do draw. But yeah, about 20 years ago, there was no, I guess, no rules in place, but that's definitely evolved where I got to be number one.
So
and it's okay to be selfish.
This is going to map your constitutional pattern. So this is like mapping your set point before you consciously tried to do something else. So that's what I love about this the most, because of course, like we do try to adapt and change over time.
The ayahuasca 10 years ago did make a big
change in
big shift. Yeah.
Love that. So essentially with yours, your fear is going to be more that like kind of easy, adaptable. You're not necessarily going to get hypervigilant. You're not even, I can see here that you value control and process, but it's not something that you
It's not needed. Yeah,
exactly.
It's not needed.
Yeah. So jinx. You don't need it. Depending on what's going on with you, you might actually feel like you need it. It's like a helper. You're going to not feel like you necessarily need it. You actually go into a similar sort of communication thing because you've got communication next as well. Your 5- scores are low, so you're going to be there potentially shorter. And I think where I would see this play out is that this might be a way of exercising tact. Like, you know what the truth is and you know exactly like what to say, but you know when to pull back.
It may not be worth it to say.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
There's no value coming out of it.
So yours is less like pulling back and observing and trying to figure out the what. You already know the what, and it's really more a matter of, is this going to add value or is this not appropriate?
What's the point?
Like, there's no point. So that's kind of where I'm going with this tact thing is, you can kind of toggle this on or off. So I could see that you could also really push buttons and like be funny and say a bunch of wild shit, but you're going to know when to do that appropriately and when not to, which is very much a byproduct of the pattern type that you have, which has a very high level of EQ because you have to read where other people are at so that you know
what to
say.
How
do you need me to be to make this go smoothly?
Yeah. But that EQ is learned because you're in sales. You have to read the room. You have to do that. And 25 years of practicing that, obviously.
Yes, but I would say based on the prediction model, you were already kind of slated to go that direction.
Yeah, it's just a natural, easiest path.
Because not everybody has anything like that. Like learning EQ for many people, most people is very challenging, but you already had the natural budding of that. And then because people are drawn to you, you end up becoming almost more of like not a manager in terms of like a overt, like mean dominating alpha, but you're like the pattern type that we're talking about is like the quiet alpha where people are like attracted to you, not because you're demanding attention, but because people have this implicit trust in you and like maybe they can't articulate why, but people just want to like spill their guts to you all the time. So you would go to that sort of communication. So either knowing what to say and when and being very intentional with your communication, you go to anxiety where he goes to anger. So like your communication is more rooted in like anger and potentially like justice and fairness where you don't have that. Yours is more like strategy, performance, like let's just get this done, right? But you'd have the tact and you know when to pull back. You also, and this is why I was saying you guys are so interesting because you guys literally have the same numbers in the same order except your start position. So like you start a little bit more of that tug of war. You don't. But from that place, you have the same numbers in the same order. But the reason I want to call this out is because your two patterns are on the opposite sides of the spectrum. Just because you have the same numbers and the same oscillation in the same order doesn't mean that you're going to look and act exactly the same way. So it's like when we're looking at this diagnostic, we're looking at how the layers inform each other. So like the top two that are internal, those are going to inform how we would read the emotional state. And then the emotional state is going to inform how we read the behavior. So even though you're a 5- plus in secondary and you're a 5- plus in secondary, yours is rooted in anger, yours is rooted in anxiety, and your perception of any event will have different priorities and different underlying motivations. So you go 5- plus, then you also go 4- plus, but your 4- plus is like, my sense of it is if I had to bet, if we did this 10, 15 years ago, I think you would have just been a 4+. I think this introduction of 4- plus is self-preservation. It's like the budding of self-preservation. Like just because I can doesn't mean I should. But I don't get the sense in this that is a natural pattern position. In general, this area is going to be like loyalty, saying yes. Like if you say you're going to do something, you're definitely going to do it. If somebody is more of a 4- plus, their brain might kind of like with you where you're like, where you're like trying to almost like talk yourself out of it because once you do it, you're really going to do it. And it's like, oh, I don't want to do it. Yours isn't going to be like that. Yours, I think, is this kind of budding of self-preservation of like, oh, it's like not my thing to do, where it's like now you're learning. Just because I can doesn't mean I should run toward the fire. But my sense from this is that it would have been just strictly a 4+ if we had done this 15 years ago. Ultimately, people have some oscillation here, and you can see typically when it's adapted or learned versus naturally occurring. And you can see that in how the historical data is going to match up with some of your self-selection. Then you go to 6+ at the end. Again, 2 out of 5, really low score. Not like, it's not going to be like a rumination overdoing it. Yours is just kind of like, that was fucked up. Okay. And then just like keep going.
Yeah.
So for all 3 of ours, when you have that last 6+, that's a low score, it's very likely to almost be like a sarcastic, flippant, like, that was fucked. What just happened? But then you just keep, like, you go right back into the fire.
Well, because you can't change it. So just laugh and move on.
Yes, you can't change it. But if somebody doesn't have a 1- score like that, their brain is somehow going to think like, I can change this. If I just, Brandon's going to give them this laundry list. If I just do this and this and this, maybe next time I can change it. Every single one of us is like, like, whatever. Let's better luck next time. On to the next. So think about it this way. It makes it easy, like for friends, it makes it easy because then like no one's the odd man out. No one's like the square that's like panicking and like, why would you do that? No one's kind of like trying to control that dynamic. So when you have all 3 people having relatively similar timeline numbers in a friend group, things like start to feel like things are symbiotic. Like no one's really, you can kind of mess around with each other. No one's taking things personally. You're not pissing anybody off. But when you get all 3 people with the same pattern in an intimate relationship pairing, that's where we start to see problems start to spark up, especially with you guys, because let's say we took both of your patterns, but, instead of making it you, think of it being a husband and a wife. You actually do see situations contrasted to each other, like the actual foundation of perception. But what you choose to do about it is actually kind of in sync. In intimate relationships, you can assume that the other person's seeing it the way you are and then really take it personally and cause conflict. So I just think when it comes to this sort of information, it's beneficial for us to know it in ourselves so we know what areas we have to start to oppose the pattern and kind of build strategies so that we're not burning ourselves out or causing conflict. But in intimate relationships, it is a complete game changer because you can see how this sort of like ping pong match just happens back and forth all the time.
So what advice would you give based on the personality types that you were able to pull, the patterns, as far as like personal growth, development?
So personal growth and development for yours, I think a lot of the things you're doing naturally, which are to exercise boundaries, not overdo it. It's okay to have some self-centered time because if your cup isn't filled up, you won't have anything to pour into other people. I think even like a lot of the structures in your business, you're kind of naturally doing also, which is like, if this annoys me or I can't give it my all, put somebody in between and then I'll just do what I'm best at, which years ago, your brain might not have made that a priority. You're just like, if I know how to solve it, I should solve it. So you end up overdoing it, burning yourself out, enabling employees, maybe even like letting employees that shouldn't still be around have a little bit too much room where you're like giving them too many chances because you want the best in people and you try to look on the bright side or see things positively. Your brain pattern type is also not naturally a grudge holder. So I don't know if this has changed over time because sometimes if you...
I don't need to hold grudges because if I cut a person out of my life, it's their loss, not mine. So there's no reason to hold a grudge.
But other people really do on the brain pattern.
I mean, that's just on them.
Yeah.
Can't control
So it
people.
sounds like for you, it's more paying attention to time management, self-care, making sure that you're not overdoing it. And the big one, I always describe your brain pattern type as like a sports car that's moving through traffic without using its turn signals.
But you can kind of predict people. Like I do that in traffic where I'm like, this car's going to turn in front of me. And in 15 seconds, they turn in front because you could just see the idiosyncrasies of how they're driving.
Yes, but our pattern is the best at pattern recognition.
Yeah, we're very good at pattern recognition. Yeah.
I think where I'm going with this is, let's say your brain is a well-tuned machine. You're processing faster than a lot of people. You're making decisions and you're like being methodical up to a point, but you're also not in freeze where you're not overanalyzing. So people like you end up being successful in life, point blank. But people observing you might not understand, might's not the right word, don't necessarily understand how you move the way you do. And they're very likely to mislabel your motivation and label you one way that's completely opposite of what's true.
Which is, you said the common thing would be narcissist, right?
Yes. Because when you're focused on something, it's like all of the light that you have is like shining on that one thing or that person. And then when it's gone, it's like, you ditched me, you left me behind. So an example of this that might be good, because I think the term love bombing is really common. Your pattern type is mine too. If you go back to like early relationships, when you know. So it's like in the early stages, it can be easy to be like vulnerable and all in. And like that person might perceive that you're love bombing them if they know what that sort of pop psychology term is. But then once you feel comfortable or other things have kind of come into play, maybe you're not as expressive as you once were in those beginning phases, but it's not because you were trying to manipulate them. It was real and it was genuine in that moment, but now your brain is kind of focused over here. So somebody from the outside is like, that was manipulation. You were just trying to get me to fall in love with you. Or if you're focused on a project and maybe you were really focused on your intimate partner the week before, if they don't know better, they could see that what you're doing is selfish because you're choosing work over them, when they might not understand that your perspective of it is, I do this so that I can pour into this and this and this, because they don't think that way. Mm-hmm. So you're going to be your higher order thinking of like seeing how things are connected. What makes sense to you is not necessarily going to make sense to somebody else. So they're likely to label what you're doing incorrectly. And if you don't bridge that communication gap, they won't understand you.
Which with high empathy, you can kind of tell how that person is thinking. Just
yes. I mean, so you're more likely to be like, do we need to talk about something? Did I say something that pissed you off?
But you could tell it's like they're upset or something just from their body language. But let's
say it's somebody on that right-hand side. If their brain is really wanting to overlay some sort of like victim oppressor narrative, even if you try to talk them through it, they might be so fixed in their perspective that they just double down.
But then you just walk away.
Well, but then you walk away and then they're like, and now you're rejecting me. So
it is what it is at that point. I mean, because you can't convince someone of whatever they want to believe. You know what I mean? And is it worth the fight? If it's a family member and you want to keep them in your life, you do. But if it's just someone that's an acquaintance or a friend and they're going to think the way they're going to think, I mean.
I fundamentally agree with you. Yeah. I'm the same. But I have found, I think in my work, I'm always trying to rescue the underdog naturally. That's just kind of who I am.
That's this guy.
Yeah. So when it comes to something like this.
Me, it's like you'll get 1 or 2 tries. And if you're not going to do it.
Yeah, and then it's like,
I did my best.
Yeah. So but I think that has to do with, and we didn't get too much into it. I know we're out of time, but I think that does have to do with some of the consistency and structure in your childhood environment. It's so like you don't necessarily feel the need to go like rescue people, where somebody that had a little bit more potential trauma in their childhood, you can kind of relate with the underdog, which is kind of my sense of you. And then I had a lot of trauma in my childhood, so I definitely have that rescue thing. But having said that, all those things you said, I fundamentally agree with those things. But I think from where I sit today, I've seen that so many relationships, sure, could we just kind of like walk away like, whatever, it's their loss, blah, blah, blah. I've seen.
To a degree, though, you can't do that on every single time.
Totally. And what I've found is with relatively little tweaking, you can actually really help like rescue somebody out of their distorted thinking.
If they want it.
If they want it. Kind of. I think what I do in Break Method, I have seen couples where if I change the inputs I'm giving you, at a certain point, it disrupts your perception of reality enough that they sometimes will change and then go to their partner and be like, wait, why are we getting along all of a sudden? What happened? Because they might have been resistant. And it was like just enough at the right time with the right pacing that I've seen relationships heal, even if the husband was like, what is that like cult quack bullshit that you're doing? And the next thing you know, they're my client because they're like, that was crazy. My wife just like did this and this and this, and then all of a sudden like we're not fighting or like we're having sex all of a sudden, and like how is that even possible? So I like to encourage people, yes, like sometimes it's important to know when to walk away and when to cut the cord. But I think far more relationships and communication can be saved by staying in a little bit longer with the right tools and learning how to kind of tweak how you're engaging. So yeah, I try to get people to stick around. But that's kind of my sense of you. And then I think
we're probably going to have to save part 3 for him, because I feel like we have to do a part 3 because we are not even close to being like finished.
No, there's so much more. So there's so much depth to this, and I know we got to wrap.
So part 3 is going to be to be continued when you come back to LA.
Okay.
How do people find you in the meantime?
breakmethod.com. You can click on Map My Brain, do the brain pattern mapping. You can also go to bizziegold.com. I train therapists and other sort of coaches and leadership people in my methodology.
And we had a promo code that you were going to offer the viewers.
I think it was just going to be truth. Yeah, truth. And we'll do 20% off of all the programs, and then we'll do 20% off the brain pattern mapping. And you can also use brain pattern mapping in corporate environments. So you can use this as a recruiting tool, but you can also use it as a tool to solve internal problems. Because if you're having certain things pop up in your company and you're like, why is this happening? We can actually show you exactly why it's happening and what team changes need to happen or tools need to be given to that employee to solve the problem.
Any final words you'd like to leave with Brian or myself or anyone?
Why always me?
I think final words
he wants to be Batman.
Just remember that this isn't about being broken. Every single one of us has upsides and downsides to how our lifestyle or our childhoods spit us out as. But understanding the what and the why has so much value for all of us. Even if my life is great, this information still helps me be even better. So even if your life is pretty great or you've made a lot of money, this information will make your relationships better. It'll make collaboration easier. It'll increase your empathy. You'll understand why people do what they do instead of guessing or instead of trying to have an educated guess. So
learning never stops. You got to always learn, always grow.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Bizzie, for coming.
Appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.